Okay.
The Ezra Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Bava Basra, daf Kuf Chav Ches, and we're going to begin from daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom, and very bunch of different little topics over here. Shalach Le Rab Abba Le Rab Yosef Bar Chama. Rab Abba, that's the key name over here. Rab Abba sent to Rab Yosef Bar Chama. He's sending a bunch of halachas, what he paskins, his opinion. Okay, so we're going to, in all these cases, we're going to be paskening like Rabbi Abba. So the first case is like this. The Rabbi Abba sent a halacha. A guy was holding on to an Evan. You see, a person had a slave, and he had this slave for 3 years. He had a chazak on this slave, whatever he had, a chazak on the slave. So comes along a claimant, and it says, he says to his friend, that slave, Avdi Ganafta, you stole my slave. Who Aimer, and the respondent answers, Loy Ganafti, I didn't steal anything. That's my slave. So Ma Tivoy Etzlecha, then if it's I'm claiming it's my slave, and what's it doing by you? So the guy agreed it wasn't originally his slave, right? But he says, Ata Machartali, you sold it to me. Now we go to Amid Kof Chav Chas Amid Aleph, Ata Nesatoi Li B'matana, you gave it to me as a gift. Okay, now without anything, right? Stop right there. Who do you believe? Well, you believe the person who had a chazaka. If he held on to the slave for 3 years, so even without anything, he doesn't. He gets to keep the slave. But this guy maybe was trying to prove a point or be a wise guy. He said, "If you're so confident that it's your slave." So I want you, if you want, you can swear the tool and take back the slave. So he gave him an opportunity to make a shvuah and take back the slave. So normally we never have a situation in the Gemara or the Torah where a person swears and collects. He's always swearing and defending his property. But the other guy offered him the opportunity to listen. If you think it's your slave and you never gave it to me as a gift or sold it to me, if you want, you can swear and take it back. Vinishban, the guy swore, and he actually went through with the whole thing. So the person can't retract and say, no, I'm regretting that I allowed you to swear. He can't say, I'm still keeping the slave. Once you gave the opportunity for somebody and you didn't have to, and the guy took you up on your offer, you can't retract on that. You gave your word that you're doing something and you're allowing something to happen, you can't take it back. Says the Gemara, "My Kamashmalon." What kind of chiddush is he teaching you? What is Rababa teaching you? Tanina, this is an open Mishnah. Amaloi, if a man says like this, that 2 people are having a lawsuit, and he says, one guy says, well, maybe the defendant says, Neman alai Abba, I trust your father as being the judge. Now, normally, I mean, one of the fathers cannot be the judge because he's a relative. So, but if he says, Neman alai Abba, Neman alai Avicha, or the other one says, I trust your father to be the judge. Or one of the litigants says, Neman alai Shloisha Roya Bakar, I trust, even if you have 3 shepherds. Shepherds are considered to be the most ignorant people when regarding to civil matters, right? And the guy says, I'll trust in my case. I'm so confident I'll win that even if you put up three shepherds to be the judge, I'm okay with that. So once they went through with the psak and it went through, and let's say he lost the case, right? Like the election, you lose it. Can you say, they stole it? Can I retract? Rab Meir says, but you can retract. But the Chachamim, that's the halacha, you can't retract. So we see clearly that the Chachamim concurs that once you agree to something and it goes through, even though you didn't have to be so generous, but once you agree to something, you cannot retract. So if that's the case, then what is the novelty of Rabbi Abba? The halacha is always like the Chachamim. Answers the Gemara, Hakamashmalan. It's teaching you that be'etein lecha machaloikis v'halacha k'divrei chachamim. That's the point of Rav Nachman. He's teaching you that the halacha is like the words of the chachamim, and that the chachamim would even say that even if he lost the case and now he has to give over money, he can't keep money, then the chachamim will still maintain the position that he has to cough up the money. And even the chachamim will say that einu yachal achzaba, because there's an opinion in Bava Metzia that the chachamim never extended their position in a situation where a guy lost the case and he has to pay. They only accepted their position if the guy keeps the case, would be able to keep something, but not give something. So the chiddush is that the halacha is, that's what Rabbi Abba is teaching you, that the halacha is like the chachamim, even if it causes somebody to now have to cough up the money and lose the case.
In this situation, they would never ask the actual eved, did you ever work for this guy? Were you sold?
Right.
Nothing.
So,
I mean, he's a person,
right.
I mean, why not ask? What if he says, I never even ever worked for this guy? How could he possibly have sold me?
Right. So that's an excellent question. So one of the Rashbam, you see where my finger is, Oy bekotan hamuto ba'arisu. Maybe we're talking about over here a baby, an infant that's in the bed, a baby eved. So you can't that you can't ask the baby eved, who did you work for? But the other situation, even if you're talking about an adult, I guess the avodim are never trusted. They never trust. You can't trust an Eved Kanani, and we don't believe him even if he says the truth. We know that this Eved Kanani worked for this person Gimel Shanim, 3 years. Kegoin shehachzeh by Gimel Shanim. So even if the Eved says, "Oh, I belong to the original owner," we won't believe him because the original owner. Why was he so silent for 3 years? So that's what we're talking about over here. But it's a good question.
Okay.
Now, it's Shalach le Rab Abba le Rav Yosef bar Chama. Rab Abba sent another halacha to Rav Yosef bar Chama. The halacha is, you could put a lien on property. That that, right? If you owed money, you could put a lien on foreclose on property. But sometimes slaves have certain halacha ramifications as a property, right? So they're considered like property. So the halacha is goivin, one can foreclose on let's say a loan that somebody didn't pay you, min havadim, from slaves, because slaves are considered to be like land. But Rav Nachman says, ein goivin, you can't collect a loan from a slave. This loan, it cannot be collected from, let's say, movable items. You can't collect, you can't foreclose on somebody's furniture. You could only close on his field, but not foreclose on his on something that's movable. So an eved has a din of a movable object, and therefore Rav Nachman says you can't collect. But Rav Abba said you can collect from avodim. New case. Shalach le Rav Abba Rav Yosef bar Chama. Another situation. Rav Abba sent to Rav Yosef bar Chama. Halacha is like this. You can't testify, let's say, against, or you can't testify on behalf of a relative, right? You can't testify on behalf of your brother. They're not going to believe you. But what happens, can you testify on your father's first cousin? So shlishi b'sheni, that's called a shlishi b'sheni. You're the grandchild, and your grandfather's brother's son, basically your father's brother's son. So can you testify against your father? Can you testify as a defendant for the sake of your father's first cousin? Kosher. That's where Baba said it's kosher. Rava said barishin. You could even testify on behalf, not only on behalf of your father's first cousin, but you can testify on behalf of your great uncle, your father's uncle. So that's Rava's situation. They're not considered so close to each other. Again, a relative, you can't testify to defend somebody you're close to. But Rava said that for your great uncle, you're not so close to, so you can even testify on his behalf. Marbar of Akshi, interestingly enough, Aksha Abba Ba'Abba, you can testify for your grandfather. In other words, you're not even so close to your grandfather that you could actually be a kosher witness when it comes to testifying on behalf of your grandfather. Even though we always say bonim harein kabonim, son is like a grandson is like a son, but Ramar Barashi didn't hold like that. Less hilchasa kamar baravashi. The halacha is not like Mar Baravashi, and of course, even for many generations, a great great grandson cannot testify on behalf of a great great grandfather because they're still in the same line, and therefore they're considered related, and it won't be a kosher edus. Sholach le Rab Abba Rav Yosef bar Chama. Another situation. Rab Abba sent to Rav Yosef bar Chama. When you know testimony, you have to be a kosher aid when you see the testimony and when you're saying the testimony in court, right? Let's say a man was a normal person and he could see, his vision was working fine, and he knew how to say that this piece of land, and he could give the dimensions of this piece of land. He can show that this piece of land belongs to so and so. This he knew this testimony before he became blind. Vinistame and loyalenu, his vision was taken away from him. So now, he's puzzled because when he's going to be testifying in court, he's a blind person and he's not kosher for edus. Shmuel says kosher. He is kosher because when he saw the testimony, when he could see, so we could trust him that he remembers. Efsher de mechavim mitzrana. He can remember the borders or certain signs of the piece of land to testify that this piece of land belongs to so and so. Aval, when it comes to galima, to say testimony regarding a suit, let's say to say that this 42 short suit belongs to somebody, to so and so, that we wouldn't believe him because he's blind, and all suits have pretty much the same size. I mean, you just saying the size, knowing the size of the suit doesn't indicate that you can testify that this suit belongs to so and so. So, we would not believe him. Rav Sheshes says, and interestingly enough, Rav Sheshes was blind. He said, "Afila glima." A blind person will be able to say testimony, I guess, when he had the vision, to say testimony now that he's blind, that this suit belongs to so and so, because efshar, it's possible, because even a 42 short, you still have to cut it down to the exact measurement of the person that's wearing it. So efshar, it's possible, he can get the length and the width pretty accurate, and therefore we would trust him if he says testimony regarding a suit. Aval naska, but to sending a bar of silver, to say a bar of silver belongs to so and so, we don't believe him. Why? Because all bars of silver pretty much have the same size, and they all they have the same look. So therefore, how would you be able to say testimony? I know for a fact that this bar of silver belongs to so and so. Papa says nascha, even a bar of silver he would be believed. After the mechava midas mishkaloisav, it's possible that he can get the weights, the pretty much the weights exact. I guess all bars of silver are not exactly precisely the same weight, and therefore perhaps maybe he'll be able to hold it in his hand and be able to say, I'm very sure that this piece of bar of silver belongs to so and so, because I remember that it weighed this amount when I had my vision. So this is the opinion of most of the Amoraim, is that if a person had his vision and then became blind, he could say testimony of something he saw when he had his vision, and he's still considered to be a kosher edus. So Meisvei, so the Gemara says, I'll have you a question from a brisa that disagrees with that. Let's say if someone knew testimony, right? Before he became the son-in-law of the person he's defending. Let's say he knows testimony on behalf of somebody, and then he became his son-in-law. And then he became his son-in-law. So now he should be Pasal Eidus because he's Pasal Eidus. Because even though he knew the testimony when he was not related, but now that he's going to be saying the Eidus in court, he is related. Or Pikeach, somebody who had his hearing great, it was good, Vinis Charesh, and he became deaf. Or Piteach, he knew the testimony when he was able to see, and here's a clear, Vinis Tama, and then he became blind. Or Shafui, if somebody was sane, Vinishtata, and then he went insane. So obviously, all these cases, so puzzle, now you're puzzle the Adis, even though at the time that you saw the Adis, you were normal or you were not related. But since when you're saying the Adis in court, you're a puzzle the Adis, you're puzzle. So right away, you see, there's a question against all those Tanoi, Amaroim. But here the Brisa says, let's say he knew the testimony before he became a son-in-law. And then he became a son-in-law. And then the daughter died, so he's no more the son-in-law. So now he was kosher, puzzle, kosher. Pikeach, first he was, let's say, somebody who could hear. Then he became deaf. And then he became someone who can hear again. Or Piteach, he was somebody who could see, and then he became blind. And then now he can hear, now he can see again. Shafui, he was normal. And then he became insane. And then became sane. Kosher, now he's kosher Eidus. Just because he had a lapse in between doesn't passel him to Eidus. This is the general rule for all these things. If the end or the beginning he's puzzle, let's say when he saw the Adis, he was a puzzle, he was a relative, or he was blind. I mean, obviously couldn't see the Adis. Or let's say he was kosher when he saw the Adis, but now he's not. When he's coming to court, he's a puzzle Adis. Then he still remains a puzzle Adis. But if the beginning when he saw the Adis, the Soife when he's in court, Bekashrus, he's kosher, even though in between he had a lapse when he was not a kosher Adis, kosher, he is a kosher Adis. So, go to Amid Beis, Tiyufta de Kula, Tiyufta. This is refutation against all Shmuel, Rav Shesha, Rav Papa, because they all made kosher and a blind person, a person who had his vision and then Loyalenu lost it. They still made him a kosher Adis. And this Brisa says that no, he now stays apostle Adis. So this is a refutation against all these opinions. And therefore the halacha is like Rabbi Abba. New case. Shalach le Rabbi Abba le Rabbi Yosef bar Chama. Rabbi Abba sent another halacha to Rabbi Yosef bar Chama. Ha'omer al tinok ben habonim. Someone says regarding a child between his sons that he said something about that child, that baby. Neman, he's believed. Rabbi Yochanan Amma, ain't a Neman, he's not believed. So this is Rabbi Abba's statement, and we don't know what he's talking about. My kama, what is Rabbi Abba saying? Amar Abaya said, Hachi kama. This is what Rabbi Abba means to say. Ha'oime al tinik ben abonim. He says about one little baby amongst all his kids. He says, and perhaps he's, let's say, on his deathbed. He said, Yirash kol nechasai. I want him to inherit all my possessions. Neman, we believe him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, which we'll learn later on, that the Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika says somebody can give all the inheritance to one kid. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, ain't a Neman, he's not believed. Rabbanan. We paskin like the Rabbanan, that one cannot disinherit his other kids. He cannot say, oh, I'm giving all my inheritance to one kid. So this is what Rabbi Yosef ben Chama said, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, that a person could say, one kid should inherit all my possessions. So if that's what Rabbi Abba said, Rava doesn't like Abaya's interpretation of what Rabbi Abba just said. Maskif la Rava, so Rava said, Hi Neman ve'ena Neman, is that Neman ve'neman, he's believed or not believed? That's Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Abba have a disagreement. I mean, Yirish v'lo Yirish b'boyle. That should be the wording that they both use. Rabbi Abba said, if he says such a thing, Yirish, that kid inherits. Rabbi Yochanan should say he doesn't inherit. But the fact that they both use the word believed or not believed comes to imply that their disagreement is something a totally different matter. So Ella Amar Rava, Ravas explain that they're arguing about Rabba and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing about another matter, totally different. Hachi Kamar, this is what they said. Someone says regarding a child amongst other children, he says, Bacharhu, this is my oldest son. Now, we know that there was a chazak on another child being the oldest son. And he said, no, this child is my oldest son. So Naaman, we would believe him. We would believe him, Rabbi Yehuda, that a person that the Torah says Yakir, that we believe the father if he determines who is the Bechar that gets Pishnayim, even against a chazaka that everybody assumed that another kid was the Bechar. So that's what Rabba's opinion is, that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan Ein Naaman, he's not believed. K'Rabbanan, we paskin like Rabbanan, that if there's a chazaka assuming that everybody knows or everybody assumes that one of the children is the Bechar, the father is not believed to go against that chazaka. So that was another Rabba's paskening like Rabbi Yehuda. Shalach Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef Bachama, he said like this. Rabbi Abba sent to Rabbi Yosef Bachama. Again, the guy is on his deathbed. Somebody says, Titoil ishti ke'echad min abonim. I want my wife to inherit like one of my kids. Normally, a wife gets a ksuba and that's it. But he wants, probably in addition to his ksuba, to be like that extra kid. And they should divide his inheritance with his wife. So Noitelas ke'echad min abonim. She taka takes, when he dies, she becomes like another person that they have to include her in the splitting of the assets. Amar Rava, so Rava said, Uven chosim shel achshav. That only works where the possessions that he had when he made that statement. But if he got possessions after he made that statement, the wife is not part of it. Because technically, the reason why this works, a wife doesn't inherit when there's children, but he's pretty much gifting it to her. But he's gifting to her, he could only gift something in his possession. Something that's not in his possession, he cannot gift to her. So therefore, it would not apply to possessions that this person earned after he made that statement that my wife should inherit like one of my kids. And also, we determine how much the wife gets when, at the time we're splitting up the assets, how many kids he has. Because even if he has more children after he's made that statement, then she would get less of the split, obviously, because there's more children at the time that he died. Or if, let's say, there's less children, so let's say some of his children died off, then she would get more of a portion. We determine how much he's getting based on the time that the split happens, which is when he dies. Another thing. Shalach le Rab Abba le Rab Yosef bar Chama, and this is the final thing. Rab Abba said to Rab Yosef bar Chama, Hamoitzi shtar choiv al chaverei. Someone pulls out a loan document against his friend. And the Malva Oime, the lender says, Loi nifrati klum, I was never paid back anything from this loan document. The Loiva Oime, Loiva says, Parati mechetza, I paid back half. So really, the Loiva should take a shvua moida b'miktzas. If you agree that you owe half, then the Torah requires you that you have to swear and say that you don't owe any more. But the Eidim, the now testimony, are not only defending the loiva, but they even going more than the loiva. They're telling that the borrower paid the whole amount. Not that the borrower said, I paid half. The Eidim are saying testimony that against the borrower and supporting the borrower even more by saying that he paid everything. So the halacha is nishba. The borrower has to swear that he only paid half. Now, and so therefore he still owes the other half. The goiva and the lender can collect mechza, the other half, min nechosim b'nei from freestanding possessions. Avol min mushubadim, but to foreclose on property that the borrower sold to somebody else, loy, we don't allow him to do that. The amri, because the people who bought the property from the borrower can say that this borrower really doesn't owe you any money. Anan a'edim samchinim. We rely on the testimony of the witnesses, and the witnesses say that he doesn't owe you any money, and therefore leave us alone. We bought this property with the assumption that the witnesses are correct, and therefore he doesn't owe you any money. And therefore the lender could only collect from freestanding property. Now the Gemara just concludes one last statement. The question is, why does the borrower have to swear? He has Adam that really are supporting him that he doesn't know anything. So he's like not really a moida b'miktsas. He's like he's doing somebody a favor. And when you returning a lost item to somebody, Rabbi Kiva says you don't have to swear. So the Gemara says, "Hani mili heichad leike edim, aber heichad deike edim irtusa irtas." What the Gemara is saying is that when the borrower said, "I owe half," he didn't know what the edim are going to say. He just he could assume that the lender, the edim, were going to say, "You owe everything." So therefore, he's really a true moida b'mektzas, and he has to swear, even though if it turned out that the edim supported him and said that you don't owe anything. That's what the Gemara says. But Mar Baravashi says Mar Baravashi is going to say no, that in this case the borrower doesn't have to swear. Maskav lo Mar Baravashi says Adarab, the opposite should hold true. Even though Rav Shimon ben Elazar holds elsewhere in Bava Metzia that you're considered to be a moida b'miktsas, since we have Adam that support you, since we have Adam that support you, you're not considered to be a moida b'miktsas. You're not considered to be a moida b'miktsas because your Adam are supporting you. You don't owe anything, and the only time the Torah made you swear is if only you're the one that's saying you owe half. But if you're the one saying you owe half, but Adam say you owe nothing, then you don't have to make a shvuah. Okay, so that was the last case over here.